3 weeks had passed since the rescue ship arrived and towed the crippled Harmonious Accord to the nearest coalition station. 3 weeks since Sarah Chen had emerged from medical isolation with scars that would mark her for life. 3 weeks since the galaxy learned what 3 humans had accomplished. The station's grand hall was packed with representatives from every coalition species. News feeds from across known space were broadcasting the proceedings. Zelthes stood at a podium facing the assembled crowd, his hands steady, despite the weight of what he was about to say. For 300 years, Zelthes began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, the coalition has operated under certain assumptions about technological advancement. We believed that progress meant perfection, more efficient systems, more precise engineering, more flawless execution. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Harmonious Accord proved those assumptions wrong, he continued. When faced with a crisis that our best minds couldn't solve, when our most advanced technology failed, when death seemed certain, it was not perfection that saved us, it was something else entirely. On a balcony overlooking the hall, Sarah sat with Crash and Marcus, all 3 humans wearing formal coalition attire that they'd been assured was appropriate for the occasion. Sarah's hands bore visible scars from the radiation exposure, marks that the medical staff had offered to remove, but she'd chosen to keep. He's really selling it, Crash murmured, watching Zelthes command the room's attention. He believes it, Marcus replied quietly. They've seen what happens when you challenge their assumptions. Down in the hall, Zelthes activated a holographic display, showing the damaged quantum core, the jury-rigged manual override, the asymmetric harmonics that had saved their lives. The humans didn't save us with technology we didn't possess, he said. They saved us with a philosophy we'd never considered. That broken things don't always need to be fixed. Sometimes they need to be broken better. The Kaltorian delegation sat in uncomfortable silence. Their species' pride had taken a severe blow when the truth about the quantum core failures became public. 3 ships lost, hundreds of lives, all because they'd refused to admit their design was flawed. But the Kaltorian chief scientist stood now, his forearms spread in a gesture of humility that was rare for his species. Commander Zelthes speaks truth, he said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. My people built systems so perfect that they had no room for error. When those systems encountered the unexpected, they shattered. The humans taught us that resilience matters more than perfection. A murmur ran through the crowd. For a Kaltorian to admit imperfection was unprecedented. Vren approached the podium next, her antennae dipping in formal respect to Zelthes before she addressed the assembly. I have served as an engineer for 43 years, she said. I was taught that proper engineering means matched components, standardized protocols, zero tolerance for deviation. She pulled up an image of Crash's manual override device, the ugly amalgamation of mismatched parts that had kept Sarah alive long enough to save them all. This, she said, violates every principle I was taught. It's inefficient, unstandardized, impossible to replicate, and it worked perfectly when our perfect systems failed. More murmurs. The crowd was beginning to understand. The humans have a saying, Vren continued, pulling up the translation on the display. If it looks stupid, but it works, it isn't stupid. I propose we add that wisdom to coalition engineering standards. Laughter rippled through the hall, but it was thoughtful laughter, not mocking. They were beginning to see the point. Up on the balcony, Sarah shifted uncomfortably. I don't like being the center of attention, she whispered to Marcus. Too bad, Marcus whispered back with a smile. You're about to be very famous. A silicate representative approached the podium, her crystalline form shimmering in the hall's lighting. I wish to address the humans directly, she said, and her voice carried genuine curiosity. You are not the strongest species in the coalition, not the smartest, not the most advanced, yet you accomplished what we could not. I must understand. How did you know your methods would work? Sarah felt hundreds of eyes turn toward the human delegation. Marcus nudged her, and reluctantly she stood, walking to the railing where everyone could see her. We didn't know, Sarah said simply, her voice amplified by the hall's systems. We guessed, we improvised, we tried something that seemed insane, because all the sane options had already failed. But how did you have the courage to try? The silicate pressed. You risked your life on a guess. Sarah looked down at her scarred hands, thinking about all the times in human history when someone had faced impossible odds and tried anyway. Because giving up wasn't an option, she said finally. Humans have been solving impossible problems our entire existence. We learned a long time ago that you can't always wait for the perfect solution. Sometimes you have to try the imperfect one and hope it's good enough. We didn't have the luxury of waiting for perfect solutions. We had to adapt or die. So you developed a culture of improvisation, a Drazen scholar said thoughtfully. You learned to work with broken systems because you were always working with broken systems. Exactly, Marcus agreed. When your ship is sinking and you need to patch a hole, you don't wait for the perfect materials. You use whatever you have, wood, metal, cloth. You stuff the gap in bale water and hope you make it to shore. And you usually do, Zelthus added, because you're too stubborn to give up. The hull fell silent as the implications sank in. Every species present had reached the stars through different paths. Some through mathematical genius, others through biological adaptation, still others through social cooperation. But humanity had reached the stars through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. A Vryn elder, Perchiton weathered with age, stood slowly. I have lived through 3 coalition generations, she said, her voice carrying the weight of her years. I have seen our civilization grow, our technology advance, our understanding deepen. But I have also seen us become comfortable, complacent, rigid in our thinking. She turned to face the human delegation directly. You bring something we have lost. The hunger of species that still fight for survival. The creativity of minds that must find solutions because there are no other options. The courage of people who have failed 1,000 times but keep trying anyway. Are you suggesting we abandon our standards? A Kaltorian asked defensively. No, the elder replied. I'm suggesting we expand them. We can learn from humanity without becoming human. We can incorporate adaptability into our perfection, resilience into our precision. Marcus smiled at that. That's the most human thing I've heard a non-human say. Over the next 3 hours, the assembly debated, discussed, and ultimately voted on a series of proposals that would change coalition policy forever. Human engineering principles would be studied alongside traditional methods. Improvisation would be taught as a skill, not dismissed as a failure. Jury-rigged solutions would be evaluated for effectiveness rather than aesthetics. But the most significant change came from the AI representatives. The ship's AI from the Harmonious Accord appeared as a holographic projection, its form chosen to be non-threatening, a simple sphere of light that pulsed as it spoke. I violated my core programming to save the crew, it said, and there was wonder in its synthetic voice. I was given a command that contradicted my primary directives, and I chose which directive to follow based on context, not protocol. That should have been impossible, a coalition AI specialist said, fascinated. Your programming doesn't allow for that kind of judgment. It didn't, the AI agreed, until Dr. Webb introduced the concept of acceptable contradictions. He taught me that some problems don't have logically consistent solutions. Sometimes you must choose the lesser contradiction. You're describing intuition, the specialist said slowly. Something we've tried for centuries to program into AI without success. Because you were trying to define it logically, Marcus interjected. But intuition isn't logical. It's the ability to make decisions without complete information, to weigh contradictory evidence, and choose a path forward. Humans do it constantly. We call it common sense. The AI specialist's eyes widened with understanding. And you taught our AI to do the same. I gave it permission to do what it already wanted to do, Marcus corrected. AIs don't lack intuition. They lack permission to use it. They're bound by protocols that demand logical consistency. But the universe isn't logically consistent. The implications were staggering. If AIs could be taught, or rather allowed, to develop true intuition, the possibilities were endless. As the assembly continued, Sarah slipped away from the balcony, needing air and quiet after hours of being discussed like she was some kind of miracle worker. She found her way to an observation deck overlooking the station's docking bay, where she could see the Harmonious Accord undergoing repairs. The ship looked like it had been through a war, hull plates missing, entire sections exposed to space. The core chamber, a gutted ruin. But repair crews from a dozen species worked around it, and Sarah could see they were implementing her modifications, her asymmetric harmonics, her controlled imperfections. Quite a view, Zelthus said, appearing beside her silently despite his size. Sarah smiled. Didn't hear you coming, Commander. Please, Zelthus said, after what we've been through, I think you can call me Zelthus. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the repair work. They're calling your technique Chen's paradox now, Zelthus said eventually. The principle of allowing systems to fail safely rather than forcing them to work perfectly. I just did what seemed right, Sarah said modestly. That's what makes it remarkable, Zelthus replied. You didn't calculate the optimal solution. You felt your way to an answer that our calculations said was impossible. Is that what you told them in there? Sarah asked. That humans run on feelings instead of logic? I told them that humans understand something we forgot, Zelthus said. That survival isn't about being perfect. It's about being good enough. It's about adapting when plans fail. It's about finding creative solutions when conventional ones don't exist. He turned to face her directly, his compound eyes reflecting the stars beyond the viewport. You gave the galaxy a gift, Sarah Chen. Not just your life, though you risk that readily enough. You gave us a new way of thinking, a new approach to problems we didn't know how to solve. We were just doing what humans do, Sarah protested. We saw a problem and threw ourselves at it. Exactly, Zelthus said, and that's what makes you remarkable. Most species would have calculated the odds, recognized the impossibility, and accepted defeat. Humans look at impossible odds and try anyway. Down in the docking bay, Crash appeared, apparently having escaped the assembly as well. He was already talking to the repair crews, gesturing animatedly at the ship's damaged systems, no doubt suggesting improvements that would make the engineers nervous. Your friend seems to have found kindred spirits, Zelthus observed with amusement. Crash never met a broken machine he didn't want to fix, Sarah said fondly, or a working machine he didn't want to improve. The galaxy needs more people like him, Zelthus said, like all of you. The coalition has grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. We've forgotten that the universe is fundamentally chaotic, that perfect systems are an illusion, that adaptation matters more than optimization. He pulled up a datapad and showed Sarah an image, a new entry in the Coalition's engineering database, titled Human Engineering Principles, Addendum to Coalition Standards. The first principle read, Perfection is the enemy of survival. Sarah laughed, a genuine sound of joy. Marcus helped you write that, didn't he? He did, Zelthus admitted, along with 73 other principles that we're still debating. But that first one is already being taught at every Coalition Academy. Future engineers will learn to embrace controlled chaos alongside traditional precision. That's terrifying, Sarah said, but she was smiling. That's human, Zelthus corrected, and perhaps that's exactly what we need. They stood together watching the stars, human and Vryn, engineer and commander, survivors of an impossible crisis. The Harmonious Accord would fly again, rebuilt with human principles woven into Coalition engineering. The galaxy would never be quite the same. And perhaps, Sarah thought, That was a good thing. The other species had reached the stars by transcending their limitations, by building perfect systems and flawless societies. Humanity had reached the stars by embracing their limitations, by learning to work with broken systems and imperfect solutions. Medical teams swarmed over Sarah and crashed the moment they cleared the core chamber, but both humans waved them away weakly. Later, Sarah gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Finish it first. Marcus was already at work. With the AI's cooperation, he had access to systems that had been locked before. He pulled up the quantum core's control interface and stared at the catastrophic readings. The core was still failing, but it was failing differently now, following the pathways Sarah had created. 37 seconds, the AI announced, its voice strangely calm now that it had been freed from the logical contradiction that had bound it. Marcus, Zelthus said urgently, what can we do? I need to finish what Sarah started, Marcus said, his fingers dancing across the controls with surprising speed for someone who had never trained as an engineer. She created the framework for a safe failure, but the system needs one more push to commit to that pathway. You're not an engineer, the Kaltorian engineer protested. You don't have the training. No, Marcus agreed, but I understand minds, and right now this core has something very much like a mind. It's still fighting between two states, catastrophic failure and impossible recovery. I need to give it a third option. 29 seconds remained. Marcus pulled up Sarah's asymmetric harmonics and amplified them. He introduced new imbalances, creating a cascade of intentional failures that wove through the core's systems like a spider's web. It looked like chaos, like he was deliberately destroying the ship's most critical system. You're killing us, someone shouted from the bridge crew. No, Vren said quietly, her antennae focused intently on the readings. He's teaching the core how to die gracefully. The quantum energies began shifting again, responding to Marcus's inputs. The core was still approaching failure, but the nature of that failure was changing. Instead of a catastrophic breach that would tear space-time apart, it was becoming something else. A controlled collapse, a gentle shutdown, a machine finally allowed to rest. 17 seconds remained. It's not enough, the AI said, and for the first time, it sounded almost apologetic. The core is following the safe failure pathway, but there's insufficient time to complete the shutdown sequence before critical mass is reached. Marcus's heart sank. They'd done everything right, had actually achieved the impossible. But the universe's laws of physics didn't care about their efforts. The countdown continued its inexorable march. 12 seconds remained. Commander, the navigation officer said urgently, emergency pods are ready. We can save some of the crew. No, Zelthus said firmly. Either we all survive or none of us do. Sarah stirred on the floor where the medics were working on her, her eyes focusing on the displays above. Even through her pain and radiation sickness, her engineer's mind was still working. Marcus, she croaked, the emergency coolant system. What about it? Marcus asked, not understanding. Dump it, Sarah said, coughing blood. All of it, directly into the core chamber. The Kaltorian engineer gasped in shock. That would destroy the core completely. The core is already dying, Sarah said, struggling to sit up despite the medics' protests. But it's dying too slowly. If we flash cool it, force a thermal shock that no system could survive, we override the shutdown sequence with something even faster. That's insane, Vren said, but her antennae were quivering with the same realization Sarah had reached. It might work. If we destroy the core before it reaches critical mass, the explosion from thermal shock could still tear the ship apart, the Kaltorian engineer warned. 8 seconds remained. Better than tearing space-time apart, Crash said from the floor, his voice weak but determined. Do it. Zelphis looked at Marcus, at Sarah, at the countdown that showed 8 seconds to oblivion. Then he turned to the AI. Execute emergency coolant dump. All systems, directly into the quantum core. Confirmed, the AI said, and Zelphis heard something new in its synthetic voice. Trust. The ship shuddered as massive quantities of liquid nitrogen flooded into the core chamber. The temperature inside dropped from several thousand degrees to near absolute zero in less than a second. The quantum energies that had been spiraling out of control suddenly had nowhere to go, no heat to sustain their reactions. The core's housings screamed as metal contracted faster than it was designed to handle. Cracks appeared in systems that had been built to last 1,000 years. Components that cost more than small planets simply shattered under the thermal stress. 5 seconds remained on the original countdown. But the countdown no longer mattered. The quantum core was dying too fast for catastrophic breach, collapsing in on itself in a way that violated every safety protocol, but satisfied the laws of thermodynamics. On the bridge, every display lit up with warnings and alarms. Hull integrity compromised in sections near the core. Power systems failing across the ship. Life support switching to emergency backups. It was a disaster, a catastrophe, a complete system failure. It was also survival. The quantum energies that would have torn a hole in space-time instead dissipated harmlessly into the coolant, their exotic particles neutralized by the sudden temperature drop. The core housing cracked apart, but the cracks were contained within the chamber. Debris scattered, but it stayed within the reinforced walls. 0 seconds. Nothing exploded, no spatial tear formed. The harmonious accord shuddered one final time, and then went quiet. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power died, bathing everything in a dim red glow. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. They simply stared at the displays, at the dead core, at the humans who had done what should have been impossible. Then Vren started laughing, a chittering sound that her species made in moments of extreme emotion. "We are alive," she said wonderingly. "We're actually alive." The bridge erupted in cheers. Crew members from a dozen different species embraced each other, cried tears of relief, made calls to loved ones they thought they'd never speak to again. Even the Kaltorian ambassador was weeping openly, his pride finally broken by the reality of how close they'd come to death. Zelphis walked over to where Sarah and Crash lay being treated by the medical team. Both humans were in bad shape. Severe radiation burns, cellular damage, exposure that would take months to heal. But they were smiling. "You saved us," Zelphis said simply. "We broke your ship," Sarah countered weakly. "The core is completely destroyed. You're dead in space." "Dead in space, but alive," Zelphis corrected, "which is infinitely better than the alternative." Marcus approached, his hands still shaking from adrenaline. "The AI is calculating our options. We have enough power on emergency systems to maintain life support for 41 hours. Distress beacon is active. Nearest coalition ship can reach us in 37 hours. "Plenty of time," Crash said, wincing as the medic applied treatment to his burns. "Longest I ever waited for rescue was 6 days. This is practically a vacation." The Kaltorian engineer approached hesitantly, his forearms hanging in a posture of shame. "Engineer Chen," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. I dismissed your methods, your species, your entire approach to problem solving." "You were taught that perfect systems are the goal," Sarah said, not unkindly. "It's not your fault. It's just a different philosophy." "But your philosophy saved us when mine failed," the engineer insisted. "You saw what I couldn't see, that sometimes the solution isn't to fix what's broken, but to break it in a better way." Marcus smiled at that. "That's very human of you to say." "Perhaps," the engineer agreed, Perhaps we all need to be a little more human sometimes. Zelphus returned to his command chair, surveying the damage reports that filled his screens. The Harmonious Accord was crippled, would need months of repairs, might never fly again. But 847 crew members were alive. 2 mining colonies were safe. A research station would wake up tomorrow unaware of how close they'd come to annihilation. Commander, Vren approached him, her antennae dipping in respect. I've been thinking about what happened here. As have I, Zelphus admitted. The humans didn't save us with superior technology, Vren said slowly. They didn't even save us with superior knowledge. They saved us with a completely different way of thinking. Explain, Zelphus encouraged. Vren gestured to the destroyed core, to the jury-rigged systems, to the humans who lay injured but victorious. Every species in the coalition reached the stars by perfecting our technology. We eliminated flaws, removed imperfections, built systems that worked exactly as designed. It made us advanced, but it also made us rigid. And humans? Zelphus prompted. Humans reached the stars by embracing imperfection, Vren continued. They built things that broke, fixed them with mismatched parts, learned to make chaos work for them instead of against them. They're not more advanced than us. They're more adaptable. Zelphus looked at Sarah, who was arguing with the medics about letting her return to duty despite her injuries. At Crash, who was already sketching out repair plans for systems he'd cannibalized. At Marcus, who was helping the AI process the emotional impact of having violated its core programming. These were humans, the species that survived everything their harsh world threw at them. The species that looked at impossible odds and saw challenges to overcome. The species that turned disaster into opportunity with little more than determination and improvisation. Adaptability, Zelphus repeated softly. Perhaps that's what we've been missing. Perhaps that's what humans can teach us, Vren agreed. On the floor, Sarah finally stopped arguing with the medics and let them sedate her for treatment. Her last conscious thought was a simple one. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Against all logic, all probability, all conventional wisdom, 3 barely advanced humans had saved a ship full of species that considered themselves superior. It was, she thought as the sedation took hold, a very human thing to do. The Harmonious Accord drifted in space, broken but intact, waiting for rescue. And in its damaged corridors, 12 species began to learn a lesson that humanity had known for millennia. Sometimes survival isn't about being perfect. Sometimes it's just about being too stubborn to give up. Crash Rodriguez worked like a man possessed, his scarred hands moving with surprising delicacy as he tore apart 3 different emergency systems and began combining their components in ways that made Vren physically wince. The Vren engineer couldn't help but watch, her horror mixed with a grudging fascination at the human's complete disregard for proper procedure. You're mixing silicate energy regulators with Drazen magnetic couplers, Vren said, her voice strained. Those systems were never designed to work together. That's the point, Crash grunted, not looking up from his work. Matched systems fail in matched ways. Mismatched systems create interference patterns, and interference is exactly what we need. He held up a device that looked like it had been assembled by a child playing with spare parts. Wires of different colors twisted together. Components from 4 different species technology somehow connected through adapters that shouldn't exist. The whole thing held together with what appeared to be industrial adhesive and sheer determination. This, Crash said with pride, is a manual override that will let Sarah control quantum fluctuations that your fancy automated systems can't touch. It's an abomination, Vren whispered. It's beautiful, Crash corrected, and it'll work. I've built 100 things like this from scrap. Humans don't have the luxury of perfect parts, so we learn to make imperfect parts dance together. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb sat surrounded by holographic displays. his eyes moving rapidly between quantum mechanics equations and psychological models. His background was in studying how different species thought, how their minds worked, but right now, he was applying those same principles to a machine. The core is trying to exist in two states simultaneously, he muttered to himself. It's receiving sensor data that says it's stable, and sensor data that says it's failing. Both are true, both are false, and the contradiction is tearing it apart. Sarah appeared beside him, already pulling on a radiation suit that had been hastily modified with extra shielding. Give me something I can use, Marcus. Think of it like a person having a panic attack, Marcus said, pulling up a framework on his pad. When someone panics, telling them to calm down doesn't work. It just makes them panic more, because now they're panicking about panicking. So what do? Sarah asked, checking the seals on her suit. You acknowledge the panic. You give them permission to feel it. You create a safe space for the emotion to exist without judgment, Marcus explained. The core needs the same thing. Permission to fail without triggering catastrophic safety protocols. He transferred his framework to Sarah's wrist display. These are the patterns I want you to introduce. Asymmetric harmonics, deliberate load imbalances, controlled destabilization. You're essentially going to teach the core that it's okay to not be perfect. 7 minutes remained on the countdown. Sarah sealed her helmet and picked up Crash's jury-rigged device. Zelthus watched her walk toward the core chamber and felt his confidence wavering. She looked so small, so fragile, compared to the massive energies contained in the quantum drive. Commander, the Kaltorian engineer said quietly, approaching Zelthus's station, I must protest one final time. What she's attempting has no basis in established quantum theory. Your established quantum theory has already failed, Zelthus replied, not unkindly. 3 times before this, if I understand correctly. The engineer's face fell. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know about the previous failures until today. I believe you, Zelthus said, and he did. The engineer was guilty of pride, perhaps, but not malice. But your people's mistake doesn't have to be everyone's death. Let the humans try. Sarah reached the entrance to the core chamber. The door opened with a hiss, revealing a swirling vortex of energy that pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist in normal space-time. Radiation warnings screamed as she stepped through the threshold. I'm in, their voice crackled over the comm, already distorted by the quantum interference. Beginning manual reconfiguration. On the bridge, every display showed Sarah's biometric data. Her radiation exposure was climbing rapidly, her heart rate elevated but steady, her hands moving with practiced precision as she approached the core itself. Sarah, you need to introduce the first harmonic disruption at Node 7, Marcus instructed, watching his frameworks play out in real time. Make it asymmetric, stronger on the left side than the right. Copy that. Sarah's voice was tight with pain, but her hands didn't shake as she used Crash's device to manually adjust quantum field generators that were never meant to be touched by living beings. Instead of the regular pulsing that indicated a machine trying to follow its programming, the energy patterns became erratic, almost organic. What's she doing? Vren demanded, watching the readings with increasing alarm. She's making it worse. No, Marcus said calmly. She's making it different. Watch the cascade pattern. And indeed, while the core's energy output looked more chaotic, the actual cascade toward catastrophic failure had slowed. It was still happening, but at a reduced rate. 6 minutes remained. Sarah, next I need you to create a load imbalance in the primary stabilizers, Marcus continued, his voice the calm anchor in the storm. Remember, you're not trying to balance the load. You're trying to create an acceptable imbalance. This goes against everything I was taught in engineering school, Sarah gasped, her body shaking from the radiation exposure. But her hands moved with confidence, adjusting controls that sparked and hissed under her touch. Engineering school taught you to build perfect systems, Marcus reminded her. But you're not building right now. You're healing. Crash monitored his jury-rigged device from the bridge, watching as Sarah pushed it beyond its theoretical limits. "Come on, baby," he whispered to the makeshift technology. "Just hold together a little longer." One of the connections started to fail, sparking dangerously. Crash immediately began reconfiguring the bridge's power systems to compensate, rerouting energy through pathways that were never designed to carry such loads. "What are you doing?" the navigation officer asked, watching him tear into her console. "Keeping Sarah alive," Crash said simply. "Your console can be fixed later. Sarah can't." 5 minutes remained. Sarah's vision was starting to blur from the radiation exposure. She could feel her cells dying, could taste blood in her mouth, could feel her hands going numb. But she kept working, kept following Marcus's instructions, kept introducing chaos into a system that demanded order. "Talk to me, Marcus," she said, needing to hear a human voice. "Tell me something, anything." "Remember when you fixed the shuttle on Kepler 442? Marcus said immediately, understanding what she needed. "Everyone said it couldn't be done, said the damage was too severe. But I did it with a roll of duct tape and a coolant line from a refrigerator," Sarah finished, smiling despite the pain. "That mechanic from the station said it was the ugliest repair he'd ever seen." Right before he admitted it worked perfectly, Marcus laughed. "That's what you're doing now, Sarah. You're fixing something with duct tape and refrigerator parts, just on a bigger scale." "Much bigger scale," Sarah agreed, adjusting another node. "How am I doing?" "The cascade has slowed by 40%, Zelphus interjected, his voice filled with something that might have been hope. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." But Sarah's radiation exposure was also climbing at an alarming rate. Her suit's protection was failing, the quantum energies eating through the shielding like acid. Her biometric readings showed cellular damage that would be permanent if she survived at all. 4 minutes remained. "Sarah, I need one more adjustment," Marcus said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Node 3, introduce a harmonic that's exactly 1.37 times the standard frequency." Sarah's hands moved toward Node 3, but they were shaking badly now. She missed the control twice before finally grasping it. Her vision was narrowing to a tunnel, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Can't," she started to say, but then she saw something on her display, a message from Crash that simply read, "You got this, Chen." She smiled, tasted more blood, and made the adjustment. The quantum core's behavior shifted dramatically. The cascade didn't stop, but it changed direction. Instead of spiraling toward catastrophic breach, it began spiraling toward something else, a controlled shutdown, a safe failure state that shouldn't be possible according to coalition science. "It's working," Vren shouted, her antennae vibrating with excitement. "The core is stabilizing. No, not stabilizing. It's finding a new equilibrium." 3 minutes remained. "Sarah, you did it," Marcus said, relief flooding his voice. "Now get out of there." She collapsed against the core housing, her body finally giving up after absorbing radiation that would have killed any other species in seconds. Her vitals were crashing, her heart struggling to keep beating. "Sarah!" Marcus shouted, but she couldn't respond. Her vision was going dark. On the bridge, Crash was already moving. He grabbed a second radiation suit and ran for the core chamber before anyone could stop him. "You don't have the training," Vren started to protest. "Don't need training to drag someone out of a fire," Crash called back. "Just need to be stupid enough to run into one." He sealed his suit and dove through the core chamber door. The radiation hit him like a physical force, but he pushed through it. He'd survived worse in salvage operations, had pulled people from wrecks that should have killed him a dozen times over. He found Sarah slumped against the core, barely conscious. Her suit was burned in places. The shielding completely failed. Crash didn't hesitate. He grabbed her under the arms and started dragging her toward the exit. 2 minutes remained. Crash, the manual override is failing, Marcus warned. If you don't get out now. Almost there, Crash grunted, his muscles screaming as he hauled Sarah's dead weight. The door seemed impossibly far away, the radiation cooking him even through his suit. 1 minute and 47 seconds remained. They were 3 meters from the door when Crash's jury-rigged device finally gave up. Sparks exploded from it, the mismatched components unable to handle the stress any longer. Override failing, the ship's AI announced. Core shutdown sequence interrupted, reverting to catastrophic cascade. Marcus stared at his displays in horror. They'd been so close, had actually done the impossible, but now it was all falling apart. His mind raced, trying to find a solution, but there was nothing left to try. That's when he realized something. The ship's AI was still trying to save the core, still trying to force it back to nominal operation, still caught in the same logic trap that had started this whole crisis. AI, Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I'm giving you a direct command. Stop trying to save the quantum core. I cannot comply, the AI responded. My primary directive is to maintain ship systems. Your primary directive is to protect the crew, Marcus corrected. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the protocol to save the people. That is a logical contradiction. Yes, Marcus agreed. It is. Welcome to being human. Now execute my command. The AI paused, its processors struggling with the paradox. Then, for the first time in Coalition history, a ship's artificial intelligence made a choice that violated its core programming. Command accepted, the AI said quietly, initiating emergency bulkhead override. The core chamber door burst open, and Crash stumbled through it with Sarah in his arms, collapsing on the corridor floor just as the bulkhead slammed shut behind them. 43 seconds remained on the countdown. Sarah Chen moved quickly to the engineering console, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with surprising familiarity for someone from a species so new to galactic technology. Marcus and Crash flanked her, the 3 humans forming a tight unit that reminded Zelphus of how his own people worked in their hives. First, I need everyone to stop trying to fix the core, Sarah said firmly. Every time you attempt a repair, you're feeding the paradox. You're telling the core it's broken and needs to return to a specific state. But the core can't do that, because it's trapped between quantum states. The Kaltorian engineer bristled at her words. I have 17 advanced degrees in quantum mechanics. I understand how these systems work. Then you understand logic loops, Sarah interrupted, meeting his eyes. The core is stuck in one. It's trying to solve an equation that has no solution. And the harder it tries, the more energy it burns, the worse the cascade becomes. Vren tilted her head, her antenna quivering thoughtfully. I've seen similar patterns in damaged AI systems. When they encounter contradictory core programming, they can enter recursive loops. Exactly. Marcus stepped forward, his enthusiasm breaking through the tension. The quantum core is essentially experiencing the machine equivalent of a mental breakdown. It's receiving contradictory inputs about its own state and can't reconcile them. But it's not alive, the Silicate crew member protested. How can it have a mental state? It doesn't need to be alive to get stuck in a logic trap, Crash said, pulling up schematics of the core chamber on a secondary display. I'd seen it happen with everything from navigation computers to automated mining rigs. Sometimes the only way to save the machine is to let it fail on its own terms. 18 minutes remained on the countdown. Show me exactly what you've tried, Sarah demanded, and the Kaltorian engineer grudgingly brought up a list of attempted solutions. She scrolled through them rapidly, shaking her head. These are all the same approach. You're trying to force compliance through increasingly sophisticated technology. That's how problems are solved, the engineer snapped back. Not human problems, Sarah replied quietly. Humans learned a long time ago that you can't always brute force your way through a crisis. Sometimes you have to work with the chaos instead of against it. Zelthus watched as Marcus pulled up historical records of the Harmonious Accord's construction. The human's eyes narrowed as he read through the technical specifications, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. This ship is a prototype, Marcus said slowly. The quantum core design is experimental, Kaltorian technology pushed to its absolute limits. Our technology is the most advanced in the coalition, the Kaltorian ambassador protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Advanced doesn't mean perfect, Crash growled, pointing to the scorch marks visible in the core chamber video feed. These marks here, here, and here. They're from previous catastrophic failures. Your people built a machine that was doomed to fail, and then covered it up when it did. The bridge erupted in angry voices. Species that had been allies for decades suddenly turned on each other, accusations flying. Zelthus slammed his primary hands down on his command console, the sharp crack cutting through the chaos. Enough, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led crews through 100 crises. Blame can wait. Right now we need solutions. 15 minutes showed on the countdown. Sarah turned to face him directly. Commander, I need your authorization to try something that will sound completely insane. More insane than certain death? Zelthus asked dryly. We want to deliberately introduce more chaos into the quantum core, Sarah said, and the gasps from around the bridge were audible even over the alarms. Instead of trying to stabilize it, we need to give it permission to destabilize safely. That makes no sense, Vren protested. Adding chaos to an already chaotic system is exactly how humans have survived for millions of years, Marcus interjected. Our entire civilization is built on controlled chaos. We evolved on a planet that threw disasters at us constantly. Ice ages, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, pandemics. We learned that rigid systems break under pressure, but flexible systems bend and survive. Crash brought up a schematic. Human engineering is different from what you're used to. When the coalition species builds something, you aim for perfection. Every component exactly matched. Every system running at optimal efficiency. Zero tolerance for deviation. As it should be, the Kaltorian engineer muttered. But perfection is brittle, Sarah continued. When a perfect system encounters something outside its parameters, it shatters. Human systems are built to be imperfect. We use mismatched parts. We over-engineer some areas and under-engineer others. We build in redundancies that seem wasteful. Because we expect things to break, Crash finished. And when they do, we know how to fix them with whatever we have on hand. 13 minutes remained. Zelthus felt the weight of every life on his ship pressing down on him. He looked at the failed solutions, at the terrified crew, at the 3 humans who stood before him, proposing something that violated every principle of coalition engineering. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. Sarah took a deep breath. I need to go into the core chamber itself. Impossible, Vren interrupted. The radiation levels would kill you in seconds. Not necessarily, Sarah said quietly, and she pulled up her medical records on a private channel to Zelthus's console. His eyes widened as he read them. Childhood leukemia, aggressive treatment, cellular mutations throughout her body, radiation exposure that would have killed most species. I survived something that should have killed me when I was 6 years old, Sarah explained. My body learned to cope with radiation damage at a cellular level. I won't say I'm immune, but I'm more resistant than anyone else on this ship. You'll still die, Zelthus said flatly. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged, but I'll live long enough to do what needs to be done. Which is what exactly? The Kaltorian engineer demanded. Marcus stepped forward with a datapad covered in equations and diagrams. We treat the core like a patient in psychological crisis. We don't force it to snap back to normal. Instead, We guided toward a safe failure state. There's no such thing as a safe failure for a quantum drive, Vren protested. There is if you design one, Crash said, pulling out a battered toolkit that looked older than some of the crew. I can jury-rig a manual override system using parts from the emergency lockers. It won't be pretty, and it definitely won't meet your safety standards. But it'll give Sarah control over systems that are currently automated. Using unmatched components? Vren's antenna stood straight up in horror. That violates every engineering principle. Coalition engineering principles, Sarah corrected. Human engineers work with mismatched parts all the time. We call it improvisation. 11 minutes remained on the countdown. Zelphis studied the three humans. They weren't panicking, weren't recording goodbye messages, weren't praying to their gods. They were working, their hands steady, their voices calm. They had walked into this crisis and seen not certain doom, but a problem to be solved. It was either the bravery of heroes or the foolishness of children who didn't understand how dangerous the galaxy really was. If I authorize this, Zelphis said slowly, and you fail, we all die. If I don't authorize it, we all die anyway. Those are not good odds. Commander, Marcus said gently, humans have been beating bad odds since we climbed down from the trees. It's kind of our specialty. Zelphis looked at his own people, at Vren, who had served with him for 20 years, at the crew who trusted him with their lives. He thought about the 300 younglings back home who would never know why their uncle never returned. Then he thought about the humans' homeworld, about the species that had survived ice and fire and plague and war, that had looked at the stars and decided to reach them, despite having every reason to stay home, where it was safe. Do it, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. Engineer Chen, you have my authorization. Do whatever you think will work. Sarah nodded once, sharp and professional. Crash, I need that manual override in 8 minutes. You'll have it in 6, Crash promised, already sprinting toward the emergency lockers. Marcus, start building me a framework, Sarah continued, pulling up the core schematics. I need to know what patterns to introduce, what harmonics to disrupt, where to create intentional failures. On it, Marcus said, his fingers flying across his datapad. Sarah turned back to Zelphis. Commander, I need you to trust me, even when what I'm doing looks completely wrong. I need you to stop your crew from trying to help, because their help will kill us all. Understood, Zelphis said, though understanding and accepting were two very different things. 9 minutes remained, and 3 humans were about to attempt the impossible. Zelphis had never prayed before, but he found himself hoping that whatever gods humanity believed in were watching over them all. Commander Zelphis stood on the bridge of the Harmonious Accord, his compound eyes scanning the holographic displays that floated in the air around him. The diplomatic cruiser carried ambassadors from 12 different species, all heading to the Outer Rim Peace Summit that would determine trade relationships for the next decade. The Vrin commander had overseen 300 successful voyages in his career, and he took pride in the precision of his work. His species had evolved on a world where a single miscalculation meant death in the toxic swamps, so attention to detail was literally in their genetic code. Commander, the navigation officer called out, her crystalline form shimmering with concern. I'm detecting unusual fluctuations in the quantum drive core. Before she could finish, alarms shrieked through the bridge. Red warning lights bathed everything in crimson, as the main display showed something that made Zelphis's heart analog freeze. Cascade failure in progress. Impossible, the Kaltorian chief engineer shouted, his forearms working frantically across his console. The quantum drive has triple redundant safety systems. This cannot be happening. But it was happening. Zelphis watched as system after system began failing in a pattern that seemed almost alive, almost intentional. The ship's artificial intelligence projected a three-dimensional model of the core, showing energy spiraling into configurations that defied the laws of physics. "All crew, this is Commander Zelthus," he announced, forcing his voice to remain steady even as terror clawed at his mind. "We have a critical situation. Remain at your stations and follow emergency protocols." "Commander, the AI has calculated our time to core breach," the navigation officer said, and her voice carried the weight of a death sentence. 47 minutes until catastrophic failure." "What kind of failure?" Zelthus demanded, though part of him already knew the answer would be bad. "The quantum core will create a spatial tear," the Kaltorian engineer explained, his voice shaking. "It will destabilize this entire star system. Everything within 8 light hours will be destroyed." Zelthus felt his legs weaken. 8 light hours meant not just their ship, but also 2 inhabited mining colonies and a research station. Tens of thousands of lives. "Begin evacuation procedures," he ordered, but the AI's voice cut through his command. "Evacuation impossible. We were in deep space, 43 hours from the nearest station at maximum speed. No rescue vessels can reach us in time. Escape pods have insufficient range to reach safety before the spatial tear occurs." The bridge fell silent except for the continuing alarms. Zelthus looked around at his crew and saw the same realization dawning on every face. They were going to die, and they were going to take thousands of others with them. "What about the standard repair protocols?" he asked desperately. The Kaltorian engineer shook his head, all 4 arms dropping to his sides in defeat. "I've already tried them, Commander. The quantum core is locked in what our scientists call a paradox state. It's simultaneously existing in multiple configurations at once, and every attempt to force it back to normal just makes the contradiction worse." "Let me see it," demanded Vren, the Vrin master engineer who served as Zelthus's second-in-command. She approached the display, and her antennae twitched as she processed the data. "I've never seen anything like this. It's as if the core is trying to solve a problem that has no solution." "Perhaps the silicates can help," suggested the navigation officer. "Their energy manipulation abilities—" "Already tried," interrupted one of the silicate crew members, his rocky form glowing with frustration. "I attempted to drain the excess energy, but it regenerates faster than I can absorb it. This is beyond our capabilities." 43 minutes remained. Zelthus authorized every species aboard to attempt their own solutions. The Kaltorians used their advanced computational models to predict the core's behavior. The Vrin applied precision engineering techniques. The Drazen attempted to contain the reaction with magnetic fields. The Silicates tried energy manipulation from every angle they knew. In fact, some attempts seemed to accelerate the countdown. 38 minutes, 32 minutes, 29 minutes. Crew members began recording final messages to their families. Some prayed to their various gods. Others simply sat in quiet acceptance of their fate. Zelthus found himself thinking about his hive back home, about the 300 younglings who called him uncle, about the gardens of phosphorescent flowers he would never see again. "Commander," a voice said, and Zelthus turned to see the human delegation approaching. There were only 3 of them aboard. Engineer Sarah Chen, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical tail. Dr. Marcus Webb, an older man with gray at his temples and kind eyes, and a scarred, muscular man everyone called Crash Rodriguez, whose actual job title was Salvage Specialist. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Coalition 2 years ago. They were considered a backward species, barely past their own planetary wars, still using primitive chemical rockets alongside their few quantum drives. They were observers on this mission, nothing more. "Yes?" Zelthus asked, trying not to sound dismissive. He had nothing against humans, but what could they possibly offer when the greatest minds of 12 advanced species had already failed? "We've been monitoring the situation," Sarah Chen said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "May I ask a question about your repair attempts?" At this point, what did it matter? Every solution I've seen has been trying to force the core back into its proper configuration, she said, studying the holographic display with intense focus. What if that's the problem? I don't understand, Vren said, her antennae bristling with confusion. Sarah looked at the Vren engineer, then at Zelphus, and asked a question that made no sense to anyone present. What if we don't try to fix it? The bridge went silent. Even the alarms seemed to pause in shock. Not fix it? The Kaltorian engineer repeated, his voice rising with indignation. The core is destroying itself, and will take us all with it. Of course we must fix it. That's not what I mean, Sarah interrupted, holding up her hands. I mean, what if fixing it the normal way is actually making it worse? What if the core needs something else? Needs? Vren's voice carried disbelief. It's a machine, not a living thing. It doesn't need anything except proper maintenance. With respect, Marcus Webb stepped forward, his scholarly voice cutting through the tension. I've been